Hi, this is Steve Unwin. I'm Vice President of the American Astronomical Society, and welcome to this short video on chairing an oral session at the meeting. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for volunteering to do this important role. So here's the big picture of what you need to pay attention to. First of all, make sure that you contact each speaker at least the day before the session, reminding them and working out any issues and questions that they may have. The AAS will send out emails a week, a day, and an hour before the session, giving all the information that you need. So be sure to pay attention to all those emails. We don't load slides up beforehand. Each speaker is responsible for actually doing their slides in Zoom, and if they need help, you should do that ahead of the session. There's always staff available via Slack to help with any technical problems that you may encounter before or during the session. Most important, as a session chair, you need to keep time and keep this session moving along. It's very important to stick to the listed schedule. We'll use Slack for questions, and you're responsible for monitoring the Slack channel and reading out questions at the end of the talk. You have complete control of the Zoom with muting. Audience members are always muted for these talks. There are some things you can do to prepare for chairing a session. Don't leave these till the last minute. So first of all, there's a training site where you can find some resources for from the AAS. Make sure that you have stable internet and a good phone connection, and find a quiet environment where you can actually do the chairing. You're probably familiar with Zoom and Slack. Make sure that you know your way around those tools before the session starts. And of course, make sure that you can get onto the AAS website and check out the meeting schedule for the session that you're working. Make sure you read all the abstracts of the talks in your session, so at least you're familiar with the subject matter, so when it comes to the questions at the end, you can pick out relevant questions. If you can, be sure to join one of the training webinars the week before the meeting in early June. Everyone attending the meeting will go in through the web address on the slide here, and you want to know your username and password for the AAS in order to sign in. Please note that as a session chair, you'll get a special email for your session only. You can expect to receive an email during the week of December 25th listing all the speakers in your session, and to access your sessions you'll need to go to the emails which will appear to come from zoom.us. There'll be several of those, and that will give you instructions for accessing your session in particular as a session chair. Make sure you do this at least 15 minutes prior to the session, and there'll be a technical person there to help you with it. Watch out for the time zone. Of course, the entire meeting is done in the Eastern time zone. When you introduce speakers, make sure you clearly state their name, institution, and talk title so that everyone listening knows who's up next. While the talk's going on, you want to review the Slack questions and be sure to think of questions that you want to pick out for discussion at the end. And you should be prepared to stimulate discussion if necessary. For the session you're chairing, you'll get an email from zoom.us specifically for that session, and it's a private link that you should not share with anybody else. This is for you and the presenter with the controls that you need to actually run the session. And you start by clicking here to join, and that starts up the session. You also have the ability to put these events on your calendar so you can manage your time. So here are a few technical details for the sessions themselves. There will always be a co-host, a technical co-host, to help with the flow of the session, and you will be the second co-host. We record every session, and the technical co-host will take care of that. 15 minutes before the session, the tech should start testing your audio and the speaker's audio and video to make sure that all goes smoothly. If the speaker hasn't arrived like 5 minutes before the session, it's time to find out where they are. There's the help desk in Slack for this, and it's important to get started on time. So please head off any problems before they occur with the speaker showing up or having technical problems. I mentioned you introduce the first speaker by name and institution, and the technician will help you make things run smoothly so that you're not alone. And if you get really stuck, the tech staff can be reached at the email at Warp Speed Tech. Speakers and attendees will join Zoom through either web browser or preferably the Zoom app, and each speaker should confirm that they can screen share before starting. Make sure that they're not stuck in the browse mode. It's important to have just a single slide up at a time when you're running. And if you've got two screens, be sure that the presenter knows which screen they're on and they're actually sharing the correct screen. So here's a view of the Zoom screen that you will see and the tech will see, but not the speakers. And share screen is where the speaker goes to display their presentation. The second step before sharing is to make sure that the correct screen is selected if the speaker has more than one screen enabled. If their talk has sound in it, then you've got to enable computer sound. Otherwise, that button should be left off. Most presenters are familiar with Zoom by now, but to get out of the screen sharing mode, there's the big red button at the top of the menu there. There's also a timer, which may be useful, but your responsibility as session chair is to keep an eye on the time. Don't rely on the speakers to hold the time, and if necessary, you will need to step in order to keep the session on time. Be sure to pay attention to these two obvious buttons. We don't want to see your video as session chair once the session is started, and also you should be muted unless you're actually trying to speak. Same goes for the presenter. Normally this presenter will have their video on, but that's up to them if they want to share that along with their slides. Here's what the Slack channel for the AAS meeting will look like. There is a channel for every session. There are a lot of these. Make sure that you can navigate to the one that you're chairing, and I suggest you post a short message welcoming there and inviting questions just to make sure that you have proper access and that you can follow anything that's posted in that Slack channel.
Hello everyone, my name is
If any of your speakers are still uncertain about navigating the Zoom controls, you can point them to this video on the AAS website, which has some more details on how to control their presentation. So there are a few important things to announce when you're opening the session. First of all, make sure the speakers silence all notifications on their devices so they don't pop up during the talk. And anybody not currently presenting should be on mute until it's their turn to speak. And be sure to ask that people pay attention to the speaker who's taking trouble to do this presentation live. As session chair, introduce yourself and welcome the attendees with your opening remarks, and make sure that you clearly state the name and the number of the session, just so that everyone is sure that they're in the right session. You also want to remind speakers and audience of the basic rules about time limits and being collegial and maintaining a proper etiquette that's always expected at our meetings. So encourage feedback and questions through the Slack channels, and people can put their questions there and you can select them at the end of the session. You're responsible for keeping the speakers on time. Use whatever means you need, but it's your responsibility to hold to the time in the schedule. Just a reminder for talk durations, the standard contributed talks are 10 minutes. That's 5 minutes only for presentation, plus 3 minutes for questions, plus a couple of minutes to transition to the next speaker. Dissertations are longer, they're 15 minutes plus 3 and 2. Special sessions are different, and each one will have its own schedule, and that is maintained by the session organizer. So if you're chairing a special session, you want to pay attention to the times which may differ. This is one of the hardest things that a session chair has to do, and that's dealing with a speaker who doesn't show up or a talk that ends early. It's really important to stay on time with the parallel sessions, because people do move around between sessions, and when they join a Zoom call, they expect to know roughly where they are in the schedule when they do that. So resist the temptation to simply move on to the next talk. Encourage discussion of the previous talk, if at all possible. If all else fails, you just pause the session and restart at the scheduled time for the next talk. And whatever you do, don't change the order of the talks. That confuses everybody who's trying to join the session. Don't rely on the speaker to keep time. Hopefully they've practiced their talk, but don't assume that they will stop when the time comes. If necessary, you will have to interrupt them, and if all else fails, you'll have to get the co-host to actually cut them off. Make sure that you stay within the time allocated, and as I've mentioned, don't get ahead of schedule, and just hold that schedule and use whatever means you need in order to time the session, and don't rely on the speakers to do that. Etiquette and professional courtesy is essential. As a condition of joining an AAS meeting, you have to agree to abide by the AAS Code of Conduct, and as chair of a session, it's your job to enforce these ethical standards if that is necessary. So all attendees will be muted, and they can ask questions during the Slack channel, and you need to monitor the channel for appropriate behavior and to take action if any of the postings are unprofessional. So when you welcome a speaker, make sure that you make them feel welcome by knowing how to pronounce their name and the title of their contribution and their affiliation. And in terms of questions from the Slack channel, it's up to you to pick out which ones to pose to the speaker. And as a courtesy, at the end of the Q&A, thank the speaker very clearly and ask for a round of applause before transitioning to the next speaker. And at the end of the session, make sure you thank all of the speakers for their participation. Something to be aware of is that giving a talk can be stressful, especially if you're a younger astronomer. So be aware of that and try and set the speakers at their ease, especially before the session starts. And if you see one of your speakers on Slack, go out of your way to engage them in their science or follow up with emails afterwards. These things, particularly for early career astronomers, are really important. They want to feel that they're being heard, and they really appreciate this sort of engagement. So please do that when the opportunity arises. The AAS has a standard embargo policy, and this means that findings are not to be shared until presentation time, which is the start of the session in which the paper is given. We have a press conference, and if that comes first, that's when the publication occurs. Science talks are fair game for reporters, Twitters, Snapchat, Instagram, and whatever, even if the press conference follows. And finally, thank you for volunteering to chair. This is an essential function of our meetings, and we really appreciate the time and effort that you put in. If you have comments on this presentation or the way we run sessions, you can contact any of us vice presidents. Our emails are there below. More general comments on the meeting, there will be a survey that goes out to all participants, and there's plenty of opportunity to share your thoughts on the meeting as a whole. But thank you very much, and enjoy the meeting.